show with my co-host Jason and me, Angel, where we'll be discussing the latest topics, trends, and events of the week. So the news that's dominated headlines this week is Trump's second impeachment trial. This impeachment trial centered around the question of whether Trump's words and actions leading up to the event and whether Trump's speech on the day of January 6th incited the mob that attacked the Capitol. So what else do we have for our viewers today, Jason?
So we're also going to talk about the topic of the day, which is executive orders. President Biden signed more executive orders in his first 2 weeks than any other president in history. Is that good or bad for the nation? So we look at the executive orders he signed, and we'll get to that later. But for right now, let's start with the Trump impeachment, which is number one on every news list. Angel, you went through Trump's defenses in last week's live show. So what are your thoughts so far on the second impeachment trial?
Yes. So as we discussed last week, the first issue that both parties had to address was whether Congress had jurisdiction over an impeachment trial of a government official after he or she leaves office. In other words, is it constitutional to impeach a former government official, emphasis on former, whether the impeachment was constitutional. So 50 Senate Democrats and 6 Senate Republicans voted that the impeachment trial is constitutional. I don't think many people were expecting yesterday to be particularly newsworthy, considering how dry the material is, because it's a procedural question. But since it was just about jurisdiction, aka constitutionality, but it was actually a very good day for the Democrats. I thought impeachment trial is a political process. They're presenting their arguments to the American people, and I think they made a very compelling case. They laid out their arguments very well. I thought it was brilliant of them to show the video of what happened on January 6th to refresh our memories and how scary the whole day could have been if it's gone a different way. So I thought that was very moving. Trump's defense team came back with what is now widely agreed to be a rambling and seemingly nonsensical argument for about an hour. It was a disaster, in my opinion. So disastrous that one unexpected Republican senator, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, joined the Democrats in voting that the impeachment trial is constitutional. The other 5 Republican senators, which we expected to vote this way, also voted that the trial is constitutional, and they are as follows. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. So do you have any thoughts on day one, the impeachment trial, Jason?
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. The Constitution's very vague. And they do that for a reason. And you're absolutely right. There was a very strong constitutionality argument. There is past precedent to prove that you can do it. But as David Schoen, the second defense attorney to speak yesterday, said, is it still the right political move? Hindsight's always 20/20, and that remains to be seen. Historically speaking, though, even after the Bill Clinton impeachment, the party that does the impeaching never really gained. The Bill Clinton impeachment was widely seen as a train wreck for Republicans. I don't know how many people are aware of it, but the short history of it is they tried to get him on some business dealings, which you might have heard of the Whitewater scandal, and they really couldn't. But during the investigation for that, they uncovered the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And then he lied to Ken Starr, the special prosecutor, when he deposed him. And from there, the Republicans decided to impeach. It was a losing move for them. Whether this is one or not remains to be seen. I will definitely agree with you on the first half of Trump's defense team. Bruce Castor was an absolute train wreck yesterday. I cannot say that enough. It was bad for him. Democrats won the day for sure. David Schoen, I think, is much more capable of providing good defense, but once again, it remains to be seen. Like you said, we're in the procedural portion. We really haven't gotten to the meat and potatoes yet.
Right. So that was day one. And going back to what you said last week about how you didn't think it was a political move because, you would anger a lot of Republicans. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, yes, they would anger a lot of Republicans, but the Democrats' constituents, right? Except for like the purple states where it's like battleground states, like their constituents are the ones that want to hold Trump accountable. So they, from a political perspective, whether it's a good move or not, by the Democrats, yes, it is, because I think they're, the voters that voted them in want them to pursue impeachment. I certainly do. And I voted for, I voted for Republicans, but, on this issue, I want them to hold Trump accountable. So, yes, we're disappointing the Republican side, but the Democrat side, who won the election, they do want to hold them accountable.
Right. Typically in midterm elections, the party not in power in the presidential seat will gain seats back.
Right.
Very consistently, you have a wave that sweeps in, right, where a president gets the Senate and the whole Congress, the Senate and the House and the presidency. So Republicans got it 4 years ago with the election of Trump. Democrats got it now with the election of Biden. And then in those midterms, you start chipping away. And that's one of the reasons why I think there was 4 years ago, there was a lot of very strong momentum going against Trump because the Democrats really kept that up with the anger from the election. And they did a great job of it. They did such a good job. They won the midterm election, even though it seemed like Republicans might get pretty close. They weren't as close as they thought maybe they would be. And now, let's be honest, Republicans were lethargic in 2018. And I think Democrats are just the nature of the beast. It doesn't matter which party it is. You're going to be lethargic 2 years after winning the presidency. And that's where, regardless of your thoughts on Trump or whatever else, the pure politics of it brings that all into question, really, in my opinion, because you're already kind of fighting an uphill battle on this first midterm election.
I honestly think, and I love the American system, like my parents and I marvel at this all the time, how wise the American people are for during the midterms to go and typically, vote for the other party that's not in power, as it's like as if the voters had an inherent sense of, putting in the checks and balances themselves. So I actually really appreciate that about the American people. I like that they vote against the party in power. Like if you can't get stuff done in the first 2 years, maybe you don't deserve to be in power. That's my thinking anyway. But moving on to back to the impeachment.
You're right. The American people like gridlock, and so do the financial markets.
Okay, gridlock or checks and balances. Yes, like.
Well, it is congressional gridlock when you have, like, let's say the Republicans kept the Senate, right? It would be really hard for them to ram, like Nancy Pelosi moving bills from the House to the Senate, then to Biden's desk would be very difficult without Mitch McConnell taking his pound of flesh, as he likes to do. So, it'd be a whole different story. But yes, it is a check and balance, but yeah.
Yeah. So the House managers, right? I mentioned the House managers before, and we're going back to impeachment trial now. So they're obviously main players to this impeachment trial, right? So to give our viewers some context, who are the impeachment managers and what's their role in the impeachment trial? If this was a criminal trial, which it is not, the impeachment managers would be called prosecutors. So just like a prosecutor, the impeachment managers make an opening statement, which is, where they showed the video and made their very compelling first day arguments. And Jason agreed that Democrats won the day because they were very good at that. Those statements will focus more on why they think former President Donald Trump should be convicted. The managers can also respond to arguments presented by the president's legal team and also respond to questions posed by the senators.
So that makes sense. So we probably won't get into too much of the nitty gritty, how we got to the impeachment managers, why they were chosen. If any of you guys would like to know, just drop us a question underneath in the chat, or if you're watching the video after the fact, just drop it in the chat and we'll address it in our next live video. But real quick, Angel, do you want to get into the 9 impeachment managers?
Yes, and you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation of one of their names. So there are 9 impeachment managers. Let's throw up pictures of the 9 impeachment managers right now, if we can. And if we can't, that's okay. We'll just run through them. So we have Representative Raskin of Maryland, who's the lead manager, and he's the first person that talked yesterday. Then you have Representative Joe.
Joe Neguse of
Goose,
Colorado,
thank you.
first generation Eritrean American.
Yes. As he said, first generation, and Castro said that today too. So both of who you saw speak on day one of the trial. So Raskin, the first guy that spoke, he was a constitutional law professor, and Neguse was a practicing lawyer prior to his running for office, and their respective experience and knowledge of the law shows. I thought they did an amazing job, like I said. In fact, they did such a good job that Trump's lead defense attorney complimented them on a son, which I thought was a nice gesture, but a very odd move.
Yeah, then we have Representative DeGette from Colorado, Representative Cicilline from Rhode Island, like you mentioned, Representative Castro from Texas, Eric Swalwell from California. You might have known that name. Representative Ted Lieu of California, Representative Paskett of the Virgin Islands, and Representative Madeline Dean from Pennsylvania, which brings us to the 9. So now that we know who the 9 House managers are, let's move to day 2 of the impeachment trial. They were really on the front foot today. The defense didn't. I haven't heard them talk today, but today is just all the House managers. So what are your thoughts on the legal aspects of day 2 today, Angel?
Okay, so the beginning of day 2 is where the House managers focus on the substance of the trial. And I found the House managers to be, once again, very compelling in their opening. One of my favorite arguments was when the House managers refuted one of Trump's freedom of speech defense. Trump's defense lawyers argued that Trump's speech was not an incitement of violence and just a speech, a political speech protected by the First Amendment. But they made the very good argument, what political speech protected by the First Amendment has caused an insurrection in the past. And I thought that was a great point. It's true. You give political speeches and people don't just go out and like attack the Capitol or attack a building, so it seems like it's just like that was a good argument because it brings more strength to the argument that Trump incited the January 6th insurrection. Another great argument that the House managers made is a legal one, which is the same thing that I discussed last week, which is the incitement of violence is not protected free speech. So the House managers brought up the same example that I brought up last week in our show, which is the example of shouting fire in a crowded theater, which is not protected free speech. They took it one step further, this analogy, and said that Trump's incitement was not only like shouting fire in a crowded theater. The better analogy would be if Trump was the chief of the fire department and instructed the crowd to set fire to the theater and then sit back and do nothing about fighting the fires, even though it's the fire department's chief's job to do so. So they are arguing that in such a case, it's reasonable to ask the fire department chief to be barred from holding his position in the future. So that was a very strong argument and a great analogy, in my opinion. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah, I thought that it was, they have a very good point about the fire in the theater. Although I'm obviously not a lawyer. That's your spot. But it seems I know that the First Amendment is very broad reaching, and the president does have First Amendment rights, so they have to be respected in those aspects. And really, the argument comes down to, can you sway 16 Republican senators? Just because those 5 said that impeachment was constitutionally legal, which it is, most people can agree on that, does not mean that they're going to necessarily vote for impeachment. So Cassidy voting that it was legal doesn't mean he's going to say, yeah, he's guilty of it, or not for impeachment, but for guilt. So that's one thing to think about. You think you got those 6 in your pocket, but you really don't. And I think what most Trump supporters are going to say, they're going to blow off most of the arguments today, whether you believe it or not, for varying reasons. It is what it is. Like I said, there's a very fine line between shouting fire in a theater versus protected free speech. Is Trump allowed to say the election's rigged? Well, he's not the first president to do so. I mean, John Adams had a claim with Thomas Jefferson, and Rutherford B. Hayes saw his election taken to a committee, a congressional committee made up of Supreme Court justices even, and they found that the election they saw that the election was possibly rigged due to fraudulent ballots. So it wouldn't be the first time. I think that's a piece of history that's lost on a lot of people, which is very important. But a couple other things I wanted to note. They used a lot of video and images to really pull the emotional strings to build a case. I thought that that was very good, kind of classic, I guess, in the legal field to do that.
It's actually not
Really?
video, so I thought that was great because like it's like judges. A lot of judges would be like, a video is too much of a circus, so, and some might allow it, but it's not typical.
Mhm.
So, and because this is not a legal proceeding, they were, and the House gets to
Yeah.
decide, I mean, the Senate gets to decide what,
Mhm.
what's allowed and what's not. I thought, that was, they obviously negotiated that with the Republicans. Another thing that they negotiated with the Republicans, and why I do think Cassidy changing his vote is significant. And Jason's right. Just because he voted that impeachment trial is constitutional doesn't mean he's going to end up voting to convict Trump. But I think it's significant because in the negotiations between the Republicans and Democrats about the rules that they're going to set forth for this second impeachment trial, one of them was usually C-SPAN. You can see like the reactions of the senators.
Mhm.
For this impeachment trial, you can't. And from what I heard on commentary, like a lot of Republican senators already made up their mind. They are like, they're reading a book, they're doodling, they have their feet up on the desk. Apparently, I hear, from the reporters that are inside the room. So it's nice to know that like at least some Republicans are taking their duty as a juror seriously and actually being like impartial and listening to the arguments instead of making their minds up even before hearing any of the evidence.
Right, but that goes both ways too. You could say the same thing for Democrats. In a lot of other years, you might have somebody like a Joe Manchin jump ship and join with the Republicans on some things. A lot of bills that get passed. We're really in this hyper partisan time, but a lot of bills that get passed are actually bipartisan, and you find that a couple Republicans will jump to the Democrat side on something, and a couple Democrats will jump to the Republican side on stuff. So it's not really unforeseen for that to happen. I thought so. I did like the use of video and images. I thought that that was really good. That's really going to help build their case, if nothing else, with the American people, right? I think that the fact that the official FBI timeline proved the Capitol was breached before Trump actually finished speaking, and there's little or no physical way people who actually saw the speech could be the ones on the front line breaching the Capitol. They really didn't, at least not what I heard. They really didn't go into that at all. Also, the FBI timeline showed that the pipe bombs were planted the previous night. I believe that was one of the things that they mentioned in the House that they didn't mention today.
But they were saying like, why January 6th, right? And the reason why they picked January 6th, and Trump sent out the invitation for people to come and listen to his
Oh
speech on
yeah.
January, that it's a significant date because January 6th is the date that, the Senate, the Congress goes and certifies the electoral votes for the election.
Hmm.
So it was very much intentional that, he wanted January 6th, to have a speech contemporaneously with the vote. And like, you're saying they couldn't have seen Trump's speech, but like when I was watching some of the videos today, they were watching it on their phones. So, with technology, you don't have to like actually
That's
be there.
fair. That's
Yeah,
fair. So I'm sure we're going to discuss this more next week, right? As the trial moves through, we'll
right.
probably even have a result by then. It's look. The fact of the matter is, it's an uphill battle for the Democrats because you need 66 votes. Right now, they have 50, and they might have 5 or 6 on top of it. But they need another 10. They need another 10, 11 roughly, and need to solidify what they have. So it is an uphill climb for them. Maybe we'll have clarity by next week. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Right.
But so
Yes, so we can talk all day about Trump and anything
exactly.
related to Trump for hours, hence the title of our show today. But we have to move on to our topic of the day, which we're going to have to rush to, which are executive orders, also very important. So, executive orders, you hear them a lot. What is it, Jason?
All right, so executive orders are basically presidential directives. They direct specifically the executive branch. Our 3 branches of government: our judicial, which is our courts; our legislative, which is the House and the Senate; and our executive, which is Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of X, Y, and Z. You name it, TSA, border security, all that jazz, and the president. That is all the executive branch. So executive orders are not laws, but they're focused on directing the executive branch how to enact certain policies. Since the president is a sole arbiter of foreign policy in the United States, meaning Congress has no say in foreign policy, a lot of these executive orders are based on foreign policy. So one of the big things that everybody's hearing about this week is executive orders from Joe Biden, because there's so many that he signed right away. Part of the reason is it's very important for the direction of his policy, the direction of the country, and also just to kind of give himself a clean slate after the Trump administration, which obviously in our politically are very political partisan times, they have a lot of differences in. So
So yeah, so and most of the so executive orders, right? They're not as good as law, and laws are supposed to be made by Congress, right? So this is the president unilaterally making laws, and the weakness with
effectively, yeah.
the weakness with executive orders is that the next president that comes in can easily just undo them. So most of or like a good portion of Biden's what is it, 23 now? What's the count? How many?
I don't know. Is it 28? I think
20. Okay, so 28
there's a bunch.
which is the most ever in history for the first month.
2 weeks, yeah.
Even more than FDR, who was the previous title holder. So most, like a lot of the executive orders that Joe Biden signed was reversing Trump's executive order. So like his decision to leave like the Paris Climate Accord and things like that. So he was just reversing Trump's policies, and that's one of the dangers and the weakness of executive orders. And didn't Trump do his border wall through executive order too?
I'm not sure exactly how that was done. There's funding issues, but the funding was done through an act of Congress. So look, I don't know how he's going to take down a wall. That would be interesting to see.
No, I hear he's stopping. He's stopping that project.
He's stopping it, but I believe it's pretty far. It's pretty far moving forward. There is already budget for it though, for what it's worth. So I'm not sure all the details on that. He is stopping the pipeline though.
The Keystone.
Yeah,
Pipeline.
the Keystone Access Pipeline, which was built to bring crude from the oil sands in Alberta and Western Canada down to the Gulf into Houston and the Louisiana region to the refineries there. It was one of the competing, I guess, pipelines that Canada had decided to go with. And the whole point is to get their oil access to the sea. It's hard for them to get their oil out, and frankly, they need the refinery power to do it. And we have refineries down here. One of the first things he did was wipe that clean for. They said environmental issues. I mean, the jury's out on that, I guess. It depends on how people feel on pipelines. But yeah, tens of thousands of jobs. And I'll be honest with you, they've been retrofitting refineries down on the Gulf Coast for years. This is billions of dollars. Each one of those retrofits to take different types of crude oil costs billions of dollars in these refineries. So it's not just the jobs. It's not just the jobs. It's not just the lost jobs, the lost oil, the lost Canadian money. But it's also like now we have to figure out what these refineries are doing and either put them back on West Texas Light and Sweet, the stuff we get in Texas here, or, keep them for the oil sands, and maybe the project picks back up. So we'll see where that's headed. But I heard the Canadian government might be filing a suit against the Biden administration for it.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I can attest to that. But anytime you because I'm also in the oil industry. So Jason's in Texas, and there's a lot of oil related industries over there. And
Totally.
just as like a disclaimer, like my family and I are also in the oil business because we have gas stations. And so and also we used to run a trucking company, and back when we were running the trucking company, because of like the policies I think that Obama implemented, our truck drivers used to make like 6-figure salaries doing oil stuff, and then they suddenly lost their jobs, and then they started working for us as truck drivers. And it does affect a lot of people, but I would argue climate change is or global warming is like a bigger problem. But
Well,
that's
I
pretty.
mean,
Wait, so hold on. So that's like 30 minutes. So just quickly wrap up, and we'll thank our sponsors
yeah.
and see if we have any questions.
Well, the alternative, though, don't forget, is that you are transporting oil via train. Trains transport something like 500,000 barrels a day. Pipeline would transport like 50 million barrels a day. And from what I've seen, the studies I've seen, between having to put the diesel fuel into trains, and also the potential spills, You have a lot of environmental issues there too. Maybe someday we'll get into an opportunity to go deeper into this, but that's just some of the high level stuff. Angel?
Yeah, I mean, so, eventually we want to discuss like executive orders more and more. In our like weekly show, our pre-recorded show, we go through like how the American like government system works. And our first one should be this week. It's like very basic, like what is America? And then we build on that. So we'll eventually get to executive orders and the nitty-gritty because it is a controversial issue that maybe not a lot of people out there like know about, but it's like like at least to me, it's controversial. And we'll talk about like other things too, like the filibuster, budget reconciliation, all this good stuff in our pre-recorded shows. But for today, we're done. So we'll be watching Trump's impeachment trial going on this week, and next week we'll bring you more information on that. Until then, we want to thank our sponsor Wei Tang. We want to say thanks to Guo Chen Lo for his very nice comment. And any questions, comments, feel free to go to our Twitter or comment on our YouTube page. And pretty much that's it for today.
Awesome.
Have a great day, guys. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.